If you don't sit down, we're going to throw stuff at you. And Meade, get off your phone. All right. Anybody else want to get hollered at here? All right, I'll save this one for later. Well, good morning, everybody. Glad you're here for this another day of Brownfield events. Looking forward to all the things we've got going on. Hope you enjoyed yesterday. Shout out if you had learned something that was really cool, or something really weird, or even something really funny. What was it? Anything? Buy the building after phase one. Yeah. There you go. That's a good one. That's good. I was told yesterday that next year we can't do Jeopardy because we don't have enough smart people to answer any of the questions. So I don't know where that came from. All right, a couple of things here just to get us started here, then we'll turn it over to these folks that have some serious things to talk about. By the way, make sure you visit the East Wheeling Clayworks table over there. My wife sent me a list, and I have to go over there in just a few moments to take care of that. Couple announcements, if I could. Andy Davis, not sure where you're at. He's going to have a little impromptu discussion on land ownership in West Virginia and some of the various issues that are faced there. That's going to be at 10 a.m. this morning in the Shavers Room. Yeah, that's down the hall here in that corner there. So if any of you are interested in catching up with Andy and having a quick discussion there. All right, so really looking forward to what we've got going on here today. So without further delay, I'll welcome to the podium here Jennifer Brennan. She's the West Virginia Main Street On-Track Coordinator, and she's going to tell you about our guest speaker this morning. Jennifer?
Thank you, George. Good morning, everybody. How is everybody doing this morning? Good? All right. I'm very excited about this morning's keynote speaker, so let me do a quick introduction and then we'll get underway. We are very excited to get started with the final day of the West Virginia Brownfield and Main Street Conference. Every year, Main Street communities across the country collect and report their annual statistics, which include numbers of new businesses created, new jobs, number of buildings that have undergone rehabilitation, and dollars of private investment spent, as well as the total number of volunteer hours donated to each downtown redevelopment. In 2022, 10 West Virginia Main Street communities reported 213 jobs created, 53 new businesses, 198 building rehabilitations, and over $10 million in private investment spent in the state. And while these numbers are impressive, and we need to celebrate them, behind the numbers are the stories of the people that make our downtowns great. We need to find ways to celebrate these hardworking volunteers, small business owners, and leaders that make our town special and unique. That is why I am so excited to introduce Phil Ike. Phil is the founder of Storyville, an agency dedicated to telling the stories of our cities to cultivate community pride, support economic development, and attract and retain talent and investment. Through interviews, writing, photography, videography, and podcasting, Storyville's human-centered approach to civic marketing allows people to tell their own stories in their own words while shining a light on the greatest strength of our cities, which is our people. Please welcome Phil Ike.
Good morning, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. This is actually my first time in West Virginia, and I was driving here to the resort, and there was a 10-point buck that walked right by my car. And I thought, oh, this is West Virginia. But it's absolutely beautiful here. The people are amazing, and I'm just so excited to talk to you this morning about something that I love, and that is community storytelling. And I am going to talk to you about that. But first, I want to talk to you about something else I love: fireflies. You see, all the fireflies that I have in Michigan, they look something like this, blinking all over the place. All of them doing their own thing in their own way and at their own pace. But did you know that 2 years ago, right here in West Virginia, in Watauga State Park, was discovered a very special kind of firefly? There's only one other place in the country that has this kind of firefly. It's the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And they're special because instead of blinking all over the place, instead of doing their own thing and in their own way, synchronous fireflies blink like this. Wild. Right? How does this bioluminescent miracle happen? How do 50,000 fireflies spread across square miles, who can't speak, make a sound, who can barely even think, all blink together at exactly the same time? One guess might be like a queen bee situation. Maybe it's a little queen firefly flutters up to her little queen firefly podium, and with her queen firefly baton, she conducts all of these fireflies into blinking together. It's a good idea, but 50,000? Spread across square miles, a single firefly just couldn't do something like that by itself. So, here is the secret. Picture it like a firefly nightclub. And you're there with 5 of your best firefly friends, and you're out on the dance floor having a great time when you look over at firefly friend number 1 and you think, ooh, I love those moves, and gradually you begin dancing together. About at the same time, friends 2 and 3, they look over, see what you guys are doing, and they're thinking, woo, we love those moves, and gradually they begin dancing with you too. Same thing happens with firefly friends 4 and 5, but of course you are not at this nightclub by yourselves. There's other fireflies immediately surrounding your group of friends. They see what you guys are doing, they say, we love those moves, and gradually they begin dancing with you too. And then the fireflies closest to them, and so on until 50,000 fireflies all blink together at exactly the same time. This is something called synchronicity, or when things that are acting separately spontaneously begin acting together, apparently for no reason at all. But here is another secret. There is always a reason. Now, you may not be able to see it. You may not be able to put it on a spreadsheet. You may not even be able to write a press release about it, but you can feel it. Imagine trying to describe something like dancing in words. Not only is it nearly impossible to do a good job of it, but in the process, we would rob dancing of its power because dancing isn't about using words. In fact, dancing is about not using words at all. Dancing, especially dancing together, is about a feeling. By feeling their individual differences in blinking, synchronous fireflies either speed up or slow down their individual blinking, so that instead of blinking separately, instead of doing something average, instead of doing something that can be found anywhere in the world, they choose to do something miraculous. They choose to blink together. A small, seemingly insignificant interaction, creating a nearly impossible kind of change, and it happened through a feeling, an imperceptible nudge, a nudge that simply said, wouldn't it be better if we did this together? I'm not saying anything you don't already know when I say that the single most important key to the success of our communities lies in our ability to getting people to work together, to act as a team, to move in the same direction. But I'm also not saying anything you don't already know when I say that the single greatest challenge we face in our communities is getting people to work together, to act as a team, and to move in the same direction. If only there was a way we could reach inside people's brains and get them to understand each other better and communicate with each other better. If only there was a way to get the people within our communities spread across square miles who may or may not be good at dancing to blink together. Well, seemingly insignificant interactions creating nearly impossible changes don't just happen with fireflies. And to show you what I mean, I'm going to ask you a question. And because we're friends now, I need you to promise me that even if you're confused, even if you have no idea who or what it is I'm talking about, that you will answer with exactly what you think in your head. And you're going to answer in the way that we used to answer in my 5th grade classroom. So I'm going to ask you the question, and then together as a group, in your loudest, boldest public speaking voice, you're going to say your answer out loud, everybody at the same time. Okay? So here's my question. What do you think about Yoko? You have no idea. Everybody's confused. That's great. I'm going to ask you the question again. But first, take a look. Look at Yoko's eyes. Look at her smile. Look at her hair, her face, her clothes, even her posture. And now, tell me, what do you think about Yoko? When I walked in to the Japanese Cultural Center in Saginaw, Michigan, to interview Yoko and to take this photo, I felt like I was walking into the presence of royalty. There she was, sitting on a bench in a dimly lit tea ceremony room, hands folded quietly in her lap, cane leaning silently against her arm, and she looks and she smiles at me. And so I sit down next to her, say hello almost in a whisper, and then ask her if she is willing to tell me her story. She looks into my eyes and says this. A long time ago, in 1933, I was born in Tokyo, Japan. I told you the year I was born because that means I experienced World War II. I was a little girl, but I watched. There was no television, no computer, just the radio, and the city was all taken over by the military. I was in 5th grade when the bombing of Tokyo happened. They knew it was going to be bad. We were warned, and the Empress ordered us to evacuate all the elementary school children, and I had to leave my home for about 1 year. Now, what do you think about Yoko? Did you feel the nudges? In less than 3 minutes, we go from complete confusion to goosebumps, from having no idea who or what it is I'm talking about to the beginning of a real, profound, and human relationship, and all by simply seeing her face and hearing her story. When I first met Yoko, I felt intimidated. But when I left, I felt exhilarated. Here is a woman born in a place almost none of us have been to, lived through something none of us have lived through, and she is here in my community. And not only that, she has told me her story in a way that makes me feel like we share a secret. Only the two of us, together in a moment where the most important thing in the world is this single act of intentional interaction, which, if it could speak, would only say, I want to know you better. And sharing a moment like this, to gain an understanding like that, means that I am now a part of her story, she is a part of mine, and because people make stories, and stories make places, our life and the life of our entire community is changed. A small, seemingly insignificant interaction, creating a nearly impossible kind of change, something better than average, something you can't find anywhere else in the world, something miraculous. That is the power of storytelling. And I'd love for you to experience a little bit of that power this morning, and to do that, we're going to play a game. But before I tell you the game, because there's so many people in such a big room, we have to practice something first. This game's going to involve you talking to your neighbor. And in order for this game to work, we'll need to wrap those conversations up relatively quickly. So here's a practice round. The count of 3, I'm going to have you talk to a neighbor. You can talk about anything you want, about breakfast, about how you think this keynote is going, about your mom's new haircut. It doesn't matter as long as you're making noise. Okay, count of 3, I'm going to have you talk to your neighbor. You're going to hear a countdown from me. By the time I get to 0, we'll need those conversations wrapped up. So talking to your neighbor in 3, 2, 1, go. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Not too shabby for the first go of it. It's time for our game. I've brought with me all the way from Michigan this little deck of cards. On this deck of cards, each is a question. I don't know what the questions are. I don't know what question I'm going to pull, so it's a little bit fun for me too. So I'm going to read the question out loud, and it's your job to share your answer with your neighbor. Okay, here we go. Who has been your greatest mentor or teacher, and why? Sharing your answer with your neighbor. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Raise your hand if you learned something new about the person sitting next to you. Yeah, storytelling. Before we go any further, we should take a second to talk about what we mean when we say storytelling or community storytelling, because it's a word that can mean so many different things to so many different people. For some of us, it means a good book. For others of us, it means the latest true crime series on Netflix. And on top of that, many people in this room right now are thinking, I'm not a storyteller. I'm not a writer, I'm not a photographer, I'm not a journalist, I don't host a podcast, I don't do marketing, I don't do the marketing for my community, I don't do anything like that. I'm not a storyteller. But you are in luck, because the foundational definition of storytelling has less to do with a specific kind of product or being a specific kind of person, and it has more to do with how we exist in the world and we interact with one another. And so for at least this morning, I want us to define community storytelling like this. Storytelling can be Any intentional interaction motivated by a desire to be known or to know someone better. Over the course of her news and talk show career, Oprah Winfrey interviewed 37,000 people. And once she was asked if they had anything in common, and she said, yes, one thing. And this is what she said. Every single person you will ever meet has the same desire. They want to know, do you see me? Do you hear me? And am I important to you? All of us, every day, in every moment with another person, has the opportunity to become or to listen to a storyteller. And in doing so, we fulfill a fundamental desire we all have as human beings. Now, these storytelling interactions don't have to be complicated or profound, and most of them won't be. While they can be as heavy as sharing your entire life story, they can be as simple and casual as, you will never guess what happened to me at work. And because people make stories, and stories make places, this power of storytelling is one we all have, this power to change our life and the life of our community through intentional interaction. The stories of the people who make our pizza and pick up our trash. The stories of the people we sit next to at city council meetings, the big stories, the small stories, the stories we have heard 1,000 times, and the stories we will never hear, all shape our lives as individuals while determining the community we create. And right now there are some of us ready to take over the world through storytelling, but there are others of us, unbelievers, thinking, Phil, this all sounds nice, but it also sounds feel-goody. Well, have you ever felt during a great story, over a cup of coffee with a friend, in the classroom with a great professor, during a keynote like this, all of the energy in the room change? Like all of a sudden, every single person is locked into exactly the same thing at exactly the same time. That's not just warm and fuzzy, feel-goody storytelling make-believe. It is science. And so let's nerd out on some brain science for a second. Inside our brains are these things called neurons, these little messengers that send information throughout our nervous system. And they fire whenever we do or experience something. So I read a book, neurons fire. I use a hammer, neurons fire. I walk down the street, neurons fire. But within those neurons, there's a very special kind of neuron called a mirror neuron. And these little guys are special because they fire whenever we observe someone else do or experience something as if we are doing or experiencing that thing ourselves. So I watch someone else use a hammer, my brain is using the hammer. I watch someone walk down the street, my brain is walking down the street. When we say we got lost in a good book, that's because to our brain, we are literally in the book. Because of these mirror neurons, while a story is being told, the brain activity of the story listener mimics the brain activity of the storyteller, creating a real physiological connection between them. They say something happy, we feel happy. Sad, we feel sad. Inspiring, we feel inspired. This is a moment called brain-to-brain coupling, a moment where brains connect, synchronize, and then think, act, and change together, a moment where even down to the electricity, they blink together. Remember at the beginning how we wished for a way we could reach inside people's brains to get them to communicate and understand each other better. Storytelling is the way. Now, if you're still not convinced, if you are a person thinking, Phil, this all sounds nice, but it doesn't matter if there isn't an economic benefit, I might disagree, but I'll play along for a second. With all of the talk so many of our communities around the country over the last few months have been having about attraction and retention, wouldn't it be great if we had an answer key? Some kind of path to answer these questions. How do we get people to stay here? How do we get people to move here to live and work? Well, there is. In 2010, the Knight Foundation, over 3 years, 26 cities, and 43,000 people, conducted a study to figure out what emotionally attached people to a community enough to convince them to put down their roots and build a life there. You also might be a person thinking, well, who needs a study for this? The answer is obvious. It's jobs. Well, keep listening. The opening to their final report, called The Soul of the Community, goes like this. This study provides empirical evidence that the drivers that create emotional bonds between people and their community are consistent in virtually every city. So that means big cities of 5 million, small cities of 500. Every city can be reduced to just a few categories. Interestingly, the usual suspects, jobs, the economy, and safety, are not among the top drivers. Rather, people consistently give higher ratings for elements that relate directly to their daily quality of life, whether or not it feels like people within their community care for each other. A community's openness to all people and an area's physical beauty. And here's where the economy comes in. Remarkably, the study also showed that the communities with the highest levels of emotional attachment also had the highest rate of gross domestic product growth. Saying it simply, emotional attachment equals economic development. A strong economic infrastructure requires a strong emotional infrastructure too. Far from being just warm and fuzzy make-believe, community storytelling is community development and economic development rolled into one. Because an emotionally attached community is an effective community, the most vibrant community, the most attractive community, the community with the most potential and most likely to reach that potential. Want people to support your project? They need to care about it first. Want people to support your community? They need to care about it first. Do you want more people to volunteer, to be kinder to each other, to speak proudly about where they live, to invest more, to start their small businesses, to shop local? They have to care about it first. And storytelling is the way. So here is the big question. Phil, how do we wield this amazing power? There are lots of ways, but I'm going to give you 3 tips right now that work regardless of who you are, what your role is, or what your position is within your community. And I call these tips Phil's top 3 tips to realizing that you're a storyteller and that storytelling can change your life and the life of your community. Here's tip number 1. Be open. We are busy, stressed out, preoccupied people, and all of these things get in the way of intentional interaction. We cannot experience the power of storytelling if we don't want to. And so the first tip is to be open to it, to be aware of everyday opportunities for storytelling. They can be spontaneous, like meeting somebody new, or in our everyday conversations. They can be planned, presentations like this. Tip number 2 is to dig. Be curious. Dig into the plot. Never underestimate the power of digging just a little bit deeper, because the deeper you dig, the better the story and the stronger the connection. This means being more vulnerable, open, or detailed in the stories that we are telling. It also means asking questions of the person that we are listening to. And now whenever I say ask questions, the next question I always get is, Phil, what questions do we ask? But better than memorizing a list of questions is tip number 3. Listen. Look at the person you are with and with a storytelling death grip, listen to every word, because what they're saying will inspire the next question to ask. Not only does this free you from the pressure of trying to memorize a list of 1,000 questions and trying to recite them at exactly the right time, but it signals to the person that you're with that you see them, that you hear them, and that they are important to you. It's one of the most rare and powerful experiences we can have in this life, and you can be the one to give it to them. And to practice that, round number 2 of our game. Remember, I'm going to pull a card, I'm going to ask a question, I'll give you a couple seconds to think, and you share your answer with your neighbor. Whoa, we're getting deep. What has been the greatest challenge you've had to overcome? Share your answer with your neighbor. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. Raise your hand if you learned something new about your neighbor. A couple of months ago, I was invited by Hattiesburg, Mississippi to speak at their annual meeting. And there it made sense to include a story directly from the community. And so I flew in a couple days early and I asked them to set me up with an interview. And just for some context, typically I write Storyville stories in the first person. So I interview folks throughout a community, I'll take photos of them, and then I take that interview, transcribe it, edit for clarity and for effect, and that becomes the story. It's a way to create a one-to-one human interaction without me coming into a community I'm not necessarily a part of and being a gatekeeper. So Hattiesburg sent me to Coney Island Cafe to speak with B.J. Focasis, a third-generation owner of this 100-year-old business. And so I packed up my gear, I parked my car in front of the cafe, and honestly, I didn't know what kind of story to expect. But I can tell you, I would never have expected the story I got. A 6'5", 325-pound champion arm wrestler, one of the strongest in the world, telling me his story in a voice deeper than God's. And his story goes like this. My great-grandfather Arthur lived on the Isle of Patmos in Greece, the same island where the book of Revelation was written. He came to the United States through New York, went south, and ended up here in Hattiesburg. And then in 1923, out there on the sidewalk in front of the cafe, he set up a cart to sell fruit and hot dogs until he had enough money to build a building. He moved all the fruit inside for a few years and then decided to change it into a short order cafe. After my great-grandfather, my grandfather ran it until 1983, the year I was born. But then he had a stroke, and that's why my dad had to step in. They say history repeats itself, and it does, because of why I had to step in for my dad. For 35 years, my dad never missed a day of work. When he had to get his rotator cuff fixed, he scheduled the surgery for a Friday afternoon so he could be back to work by Monday morning. And he was. Another thing I'll say about my dad is that I've never heard a bad thing about him from anybody, ever. Even today, people come in and they're like, "Where's that tall guy who worked here?" They'll say they used to eat here years ago. And when I tell them what happened, some of them will literally break down into tears and say, "He fed me when I didn't have any money." I was living with him when he got sick. One day he came home from work, sat down to watch TV, and asked me to look at something. He pulled his shirt to the side, and there was a bump on his neck. He said that it hurt, and that he was out of breath just from walking into the house. Well, the next day he came home and said, "I'm going to the doctor today. Something just isn't right." The doctors thought it could be lung cancer because he used to smoke, but after a biopsy, they found it was an extremely rare form of cancer called signet ring cell adenocarcinoma, found in only 1% of cancer patients. 94% of those are stage 4. A couple of days before he went into hospice, things were to the point where he knew it wasn't going to be much longer. He was still able to talk then, and so one night, me and my sister asked him what he wanted us to do with the cafe. His exact words, "You all just sell it. Sell it and split the money. It needs too much work." But that didn't sit right with us. So me, my sister, all the employees, and 5 customers who have been coming here every day for 50 years met up at the cafe to talk about what to do. Nobody, not one person, wanted to see it sold. My sister said, "Dad really wanted to make it to 100 years. We're only 5 years away, and I think we can do it, and I think BJ can run it." And right then I stopped her and said, "Look, if we're going to do this, the goal ain't for 5 years. Either we're going for 100 more, or we're not doing it at all." It was only 29 days from the time he got sick to the day my sister called me and said, "You need to get here now." And I drove 100 miles an hour the whole way, running every red light, and when I walked into the room, everyone was mourning and they were crying. He had passed 7 minutes before I got there. I tell people that when I took over the cafe, I didn't even know how to cook a bowl of cereal. And that's the truth. There are many good customers who let me burn stuff. They'd lie to me and tell me it was good, and then they'd come back and give me another shot. I didn't know anything about running a business, about employees, or about taxes. It's been 5 years since my dad passed away, and since then, I've gotten better. Better at being a boss, better at being a cook, better at being an owner. But I still have got a long way to go. I think if my dad could see us now, he would be happy that it's still here. Making it to 100 years was a goal of his, and knowing we made it would make him proud. He'd be proud of the fact that we're still open, not bankrupt, and we haven't burned the building down. Proud that I get up and I come in every day. I think he'd be proud that I learned how to do this on my own. They say history repeats itself. And it does. And our history is one I am proud to repeat. My dad did it for 35 years, never missing a day. I'm 5 years in, with 30 more to go. BJ Focasis, owner of Coney Island Cafe. Now let's say that you found yourself in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Raise your hand if you would go or strongly consider going to Coney Island Cafe for breakfast. But it goes considerably deeper than just selling omelets and pancakes. Because here is a man I never expected to meet, telling me a story I never expected to hear, leading to a moment I would have never seen coming. Because before I read this story at the annual meeting, I asked the 200 people there if they had ever eaten at Coney Island Cafe. Every single person raised their hand. And then I asked if anyone had ever heard BJ tell his story. No one. But then when that story was over, all 200 of those people there jumped to their feet. They turned to BJ and they gave him one of the most enthusiastic standing ovations I have ever witnessed. And after the keynote was over, I found BJ. I thanked him for coming and I asked him what he thought about all of those people, his friends and his family and his neighbors, cheering for him in the way that they did. And he said, "Phil, one of the greatest moments of my life. A seemingly insignificant interaction, creating an act of love." A passage from Peter Kageyama's book, For the Love of Cities. Instead of merely livable, I think we need to start thinking about how we make our cities more lovable. I don't mean this in a kumbaya kind of way, nor am I suggesting it's as simple as let's all just get along. Rather, I'm advocating for the importance of deepening the relationships that we have with our cities and that our cities have with us. When we love something, we cherish it, we protect it, we do extraordinary things for it. If cities begin thinking of themselves as engaged in a relationship with their citizens, and if we as citizens begin to consider our emotional connections with our places, we open up new possibilities in community, social, and economic development by including the most powerful of motivators, the human heart, in our toolkit of city making. People like to shrug off storytelling, saying that it's all feelings and fluff without any facts, and that it's facts and data and information that create actions that lead to growth and change. But this story just convinced this room here in West Virginia to go to a Coney Island Cafe in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Brené Brown has a great definition of storytelling, and she says that stories are just data with a soul. Community storytelling is about giving facts, evidence of who we are, what we've done or what we're doing, what we've accomplished, what we've experienced, our identity, our culture, our values, and then it gives those facts a soul. Great storytelling combines evidence and emotion to capture attention and create trust. Trust creates a relationship. Relationships create actions, and fueled by seeing, hearing, and making people feel important, it creates the most powerful of actions, those motivated by love. But so we can't be accused of wearing rose-colored glasses. Let's be honest for a second. How can people really love a place whose stories are short of perfect, full of stories that aren't quite as shiny as that big city down the road, stories that don't have a perfect ending? How can stories like these, imperfect stories like ours, create love? I grew up an art kid. Drawing, painting, sculpting, I wanted to do it all. And so in the summer after 4th grade, my parents sent me to Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp, A 2-week camp of all day, everyday art classes. Heaven on earth. Each day at camp would focus on a different medium. So one day it would be sculpting, the next day it would be basket weaving, and then we got to watercolor day. I had never really painted in watercolor before, so I was stoked. We took our easel out to the lake in the middle of camp to paint this beautiful landscape. And as we were painting, our instructor told us this, that after our paintings were done and we turned them in, a real-life local artist was going to come in, look at our paintings, and then write her thoughts on the back. A real-life artist, the person we wanted to be when we grew up, looking at our paintings and then writing her thoughts on the back. And so suddenly the stakes were higher and we worked even harder. We turned our paintings in, we ran to lunch, we pounded our food, and we ran back to the art cabin. And because I am just as good at running as I am at dancing, I was the last one in the art cabin. And so I got to see all of my friends ripping open their portfolios and tearing out their paintings and flipping to the back to paragraphs of encouragement from this artist. Your composition is so good. Your technique is so great. Your trees are just so cute. And so I ran to my portfolio and I flipped open and I tore out my painting and I flipped to the back, and I will never forget the feeling of seeing mostly white space and only 6 words. Color and softness should continue throughout. I was devastated because not only did she not have much to say about something I was so proud of, I thought she was making fun of the colors I had used. And I thought that way because I am colorblind. Up to that point in school, kids had made fun of me by pointing at something and making me guess the color and laughing at when I got it wrong. It didn't bother me all that much. Kids are going to be kids. I love doing art, and if we're being honest, I kind of like the attention. But here was a real-life artist, the person I wanted to be when I grew up, telling me I didn't have what it takes. I walked out of the art cabin, cried through the rest of camp, and I left. But there at home, on the shelf in the kitchen, I saw my dad's old Canon AE1 35mm film camera. And I thought if I could learn how to point that camera at something and take a photo, the camera would decide the color for me. I could do art, and no one would ever make fun of me being colorblind again. I thought about that story 27 years later, standing in the parking lot of a local grocery store. I had just left teaching, and things had gotten bad for me, to the point where I was buying my groceries with a credit card, a now maxed out credit card, as I tried to buy a single bag of food. At the same time I ran out of money, I was also dealing with something else. Debilitating social anxiety. If you weren't a member of my family, I was terrified of talking to you. And over the last few months, I had felt my anxiety grow worse and worse, to the point where I knew if I didn't do something about it, I would never meet a new person, make a new connection, or gain a new friend. So I decided to try to tackle both of these things at the same time. Photography could be a way that I could make money to buy food. And to build a portfolio, I'd walk around to local businesses, offer them 60 minutes of free photos that they could use however they'd like, as long as I could use them for my portfolio. And during those 60 minutes, I would have the opportunity to practice the thing I was so terrified of doing: talking to strangers. How did you come up with the name to your business? What do you love about baking cakes? What's the greatest challenge you've had to overcome? I started posting my photos on social media, including quotes from our conversations in the captions. the birth of Storyville. At art camp, had I been able to write that perfect ending myself, I would have ended up an animator at Disney. In that grocery store parking lot, had I been able to write the perfect ending myself, I would never have been broke and I wouldn't be terrified of talking to strangers. But had I been able to write the perfect ending myself, I would never have picked up a camera. I would never have looked at it as a way to buy food. I would never have used it as a tool to overcome my anxiety. And the 3,000 interviews I have done in communities across this country never would have happened, and I wouldn't be here doing this, something I love, talking to strangers. My story isn't the one I wanted, but it is the story I needed. Written for me by 3,000 small, seemingly insignificant interactions that have created a nearly impossible kind of change. Maybe your personal story isn't the one you would have written. Maybe you believe that the stories of your community fall considerably short of perfect. But your stories are, whether you believe it or not, the stories you need and the stories you need to tell, because those stories are your stories. The story of your life can change your life. The story of your community can change its future. Your stories can overcome the vague generalities of simply being a great place to live, to work, and to play, by instead proudly proclaiming your city as not just any other city, but a city that is your city. A place that is head over heels in love with itself and its people. A place that sees its people, hears its people, and makes its people feel important. Within traditional marketing and communication, this can be hard to do. Advertisements get ignored. Communication feels more like commands. And despite our best efforts, we feel that trying to sell our cities falls short of what they actually need or deserve. But storytelling is the way. Through storytelling, we can reach deep into our humanity and create connections that can only be created through storytelling. These intentional interactions, motivated by a desire to be known or to know someone better, change commands into communication, communication into conversations, conversations into understanding, understanding into empathy, and empathy into love. We say things all the time like, I love my job, I love that new brewery, or even I love my city. But in the truest definition of love, people don't love things and places. People love people. And because people create stories and stories create places, becoming a storytelling community is the one and only way for your community to become the one and only greatest version of itself. But stories need storytellers. And that's my appeal to you today. Market your cities and your projects, yes. Communicate with your citizens, absolutely. Pursue positive public relations, please do. But do those things in a way that acknowledges, respects, and embraces people, while understanding that storytelling is not just marketing, manipulation, or an exclusive experience for the gifted few, but is an everyday opportunity for all of us, with every single person we will ever meet. And when asking something of you, I also need to acknowledge that what I'm asking you to do is doing something when what you already do is difficult. That sometimes, instead of cultivating beautiful buildings, instead of creating beautiful communities, it sometimes feels like you're fighting in an arena. That as soon as you've conquered something, out comes another battle to fight. Well, one of the lines of Theodore Roosevelt's speech called "The Man in the Arena" goes like this: "The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, Who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Dust. It gets a bad rap. For most, it's a sign of neglect. But for a community choosing to live in this storytelling arena, it is evidence of action, proof of progress, a byproduct of building something great, the kind of thing that happens when the 500, 1,000, 10,000, 50,000 people in your community choose to think, to act, and to change together. Dust is what the greatest stories are made of. And so let's make some dust. The dust of a 100-year-old business, the dust of new businesses breaking ground, the dust caused by the feet of critics as they stomp and complain, the dust caused by the 500, 1,000, 5,000, 25,000, 50,000 people in your community choosing to do something above average, choosing to do something people can't find anywhere else in the world, choosing to do something miraculous, choosing to blink together. West Virginia, your stories are written in that dust, and they're your stories to tell. Thank you.